Part 8. His hair had begun to grow back, and all but the most serious of his wounds had healed, but Valden was still extremely weak. Even sitting upright in his bed took a lot of effort, though he could feel his strength returning, little by little and day by day. He didn't know how long it's been since he was nearly eaten alive by the wyvern. It must have been weeks, and he'd spent most of his time in a coma-like sleep. The chief's wife, Dara, along with some of the other women in the village, had been looking after him, feeding him and tending to his wounds, and many of the villagers, including his friends Rhett and Nut, had been along to visit him in the chief's house. He was seldom alone, though he did feel rather lonely from time to time, and he realized that it was his family whom he missed. As for Sylvie, he hadn't seen her since his near-death experience. Before setting off on his journey, the thought of being rid of her unwanted attentions was all that he wanted, so not seeing her for several weeks should have made him feel great. But it didn't. He'd been told how she saved him by killing the wyvern at great risk to her own life, and how she had tried desperately to revive him when she discovered he was still alive. She was still around, Rhett told him, helping to rebuild what the wyvern had destroyed, and protecting the village from the occasional snow trolls and bears. She hadn't left him to go back home, even though she couldn't wait to get back the whole time the two of them were traveling together. It didn't sound at all like the Sylvie he knew, and he wondered if seeing him nearly die had really changed her as a person. One day, feeling stronger and more able than he had in a long time, he decided to find out. The chief and his family were all out somewhere, leaving him alone in the house. His clothes had all been destroyed in the wyvern's stomach, and so far the only replacement he had been given was a cloth to tie around his waist and hips, enough to cover his nudity, but not enough to provide much warmth. Still, the bed he lay in boasted several warm blankets, and he wrapped one of these around him before attempting to get out of bed and walk around. Finding his feet again wasn't as hard as he thought, and he was soon walking around with relative ease. The room he was in had only a few small windows, but it did have a door which led to a small balcony. He opened this and went outside, wincing at the cold and drawing the blanket closer around him. He needed to talk to Dara about providing him with proper clothes, he thought. Outside, the villagers were busy with their daily tasks, and not paid much attention to him. Those who did occasionally waved and greeted him, and he waved back. He still felt pretty feeble, and cold as well, and he soon decided to head back inside and maybe find something to eat. While he was still looking down at the peaceful scene before him, he heard a gigantic thud right behind him, and spun around to see what it was. Sylvie had set herself down next to the house, looking down at him, delighted to see him. Even while sitting, she dwarfed the relatively huge hut. She rested her arm on top of its roof, being careful not to press down too hard, or she might crush the house. Valden looked up at her as if she were a stranger. Her hair had grown even longer and more tangled than it was before, and she looked a bit thinner than he remembered. She had managed to work the shredded pieces of the fur coat back together so that she had something warm to wear again, even if it did make her look rather wild. But apart from that, she seemed fine, and he actually felt glad to see her again. "Oh, hello," he blurted out. "I didn't see you. I mean, you startled me." "Did I?" she said sweetly. "You were always frightened of me, little brother." "No, I wasn't," he yelled. His happiness quickly turned to annoyance after hearing her tease him, just like she always used to do. "I'm not scared of you, you hear me? I thought you changed. That's what everyone told me, but no, you're still the same immature—" Sylvie sat there quietly, listening to his angry tirade and feeling awful. She didn't think that one little comment like that would get him all worked up, until she remembered the lifetime of grief she had caused him, and how she had not even once sincerely apologized to him before the whole incident with the wyvern. And now that he was up and awake again, she had gone and done it again. What should have been a happy reunion had turned into just another bickering session, and she didn't want it to. Resisting the urge to simply grab him and stuff him into her pocket or her boot, the way she'd always ended arguments, she instead slammed her head down on the roof, causing the house to shake, and told him to shut up. He did so instantly. "Look," she said, trying to remain calm. "I know you still hate me, Valden, and I know why. But please, let's just stop all this fighting, all right? I'm sorry for everything I did to you. I was such a bully, and I never said sorry, but I'm saying sorry now. You don't know how worried I was for you, Valden. I didn't dare go back home because any day might have been your last. And if I wasn't here..." Valden listened and felt ashamed for lashing out at her just then. "I don't want you to be angry anymore," she went on. "I know you'll never forgive me, or you'll never really like me, and that's fine. But you're my little brother, Valden, and I really care about you. Yes, you are. You are my little brother, even though you're older than me. Because that's what you've always been to me, and I can't change how I feel about that. All the things I've done to you, that's just the way I am. Or was. It doesn't mean I don't respect you, or I don't love you. I do love you, Valden. And I don't ever want anything bad to happen to you. I'll never hurt you again, or grab you or humiliate you ever again. Just know that. Know that I'm so sorry, and I can't think of anything else to say." "It's all right, Sylvie," he interrupted. "Take it easy. You don't have to apologize anymore. I'm the one who should be sorry." He took a deep breath. She looked at him, clearly distressed. "I'm sorry for being so nasty just now," he said. "They told me how you saved me, and, well, all I can say is I think you were amazing. Sure, you've been a pain in the butt sometimes. All the time, actually. But that doesn't mean I can't forgive you, Sylvie. Thank you for saving my life and for proving me wrong." You mean it? You're not mad at me anymore?" "Well, yes, I am, a bit. You still haven't... Look, can we continue this somewhere a bit more private? I get the feeling everyone's staring at us." Sylvie looked out across the village, and it was true. Everyone who had been busy with something before was now looking at them. They must have all heard her as well. Without asking his permission first, she picked up her brother and hurried away quickly. A little later, she arrived at her camping spot, right beside a hot spring she had discovered all those weeks ago. Valden had heard about this place as well, and he was amazed when he saw it for himself. Sylvie put him down on a convenient flat rock and took off her warm clothes, since it was much warmer in this area than outside in the cold. "This is where I've been staying," she explained. "I sleep over there on that patch of ground where I won't freeze to death during the night, and I could take a nice hot bath whenever I want." "Sounds like you're not doing too badly then." "What do you get for food?" "Oh, whatever I can find, you know. There are a lot of living things around here, believe it or not. And sometimes the people in the village bring me some of their food too, though I try not to eat too much. I would really, really love some fresh fruit right now, though. And bread, and cakes, sweets, and even that vegetable soup Mom always makes in wintertime." Valden had been well fed during his recovery period, but he too missed the food he got back home. More than that, he missed the rest of his family, and the familiar environment of the castle and the town of Rismark. He still wanted to traverse the great mountains to the east, what he had set out to do in the first place. But he didn't want to do it now. He didn't want to drag Sylvie along. She didn't deserve that. He was now convinced that she had indeed had a change of heart, that she was no longer sticking around just to torment him, but because she actually cared about him. He was going to remind her of several more of the unpleasant things she had done to him, such as making him wear a doll's dress and trapping him in a jar for an entire day when he dared to talk back to her. But doing that just might make them both dislike each other again. "Then let's go back," he said, walking over to her hand and grabbing one of her fingers. "There's no need for me to stay here any longer. I'll say goodbye to everyone, and I'll tell them that I'll return soon. Then we can go." "But aren't you supposed to still be in bed? You can't be completely healed yet. That's what Dara had told me just yesterday." "Yeah, I guess so. But I'm not going to be doing anything anyway. You're going to be doing all the walking, and I'm sure you have what it takes to keep me safe until we get back. Right, little sister?" "That's right, big brother." They both laughed. She picked him up again and embraced him with her arms, being careful to not injure him, of course. After weeks of constantly worrying about him and fearing that he could die at any moment, Sylvie was overjoyed to have her brother back. She had been a horrible sister before, but now she only wanted to move forward and prove to him that she did indeed regret everything she had done to him. Maybe they could even go on another adventure someday together. Those mountains still lay before them, unexplored. If they did, she swore to herself that she would take care of him, so that something like this didn't happen again. After the sun had set, Sylvie returned to her camp with their food for the night. She had been down to the village and had told them that Valden was fine, and that he would be staying with her tonight, since they had a lot to talk about. She also said that they might be leaving the next day, but only if Valden was feeling strong enough. Grun and his wife accepted what they had heard, but his two sons weren't altogether happy to see their new friend leave just when he was starting to feel better again. "You can come with us if you want," Sylvie suggested. "I'm sure we can find you a place to stay in the castle, and you will get to meet my parents." The boys did want to see the great land of Vandan, but they were a bit hesitant about actually meeting the king and queen. Also, they didn't like the idea of Sylvie carrying them all the way there. They weren't as used to it as Valden was. In the end, they decided they'd rather stay behind, and maybe travel there with Valden, should he ever return here first. Sylvie told them she was certain he would. He really did seem to like it here, in spite of the cold and rather basic way of life. By the time she returned to her camp, Valden was nearly asleep. He was lying on top of one of her folded-up blankets, but he got up and began eating the food she'd brought. Even more welcome than the food, she'd also brought him some proper clothes, having convinced the chief's eldest son, Rhett, to part with some of his spare clothes, just for the night. "These fit great," he said after he got dressed. "Thanks, Sylvie. That was really nice of you." "That's what big sisters are for," she said, smiling. "Hey, are you going to eat the rest of your food, or did I bring too much?" "Huh? Oh, no thank you, I've had enough." "Do you really need to eat my food? I can't think it'll help much, to a big girl like you." "No, it doesn't, but I'm really hungry. There's so little to eat around here sometimes. Most days, actually. I try not to let it bother me, pretend everything's fine, but it's getting too much for me, Valden. And I'm not going to go begging to the villagers for more food. I'll probably eat all what they have in a day or two." "Oh no. Is it really that bad?" "It is, Valden. I could almost eat you right now, and I mean it." She lifted him carefully off her blanket and wrapped herself up in it. Even in this relatively warm spot, the nights could still get very cold. Will you be able to make it back?" Valden asked, suddenly concerned about her well-being after what she had told him. "It's a long way for you to walk." "Well, if I don't try and make it back home, I can stay here and starve to death." "Yeah, I see your point. Don't worry, Sylvie. I'm not going to let you die of hunger." You saved my life, and I'll do everything I can. Oh, just go to sleep. But, Valden! There was no point in arguing. He went off to look for a comfortable sleeping spot, not to get close to her. She didn't usually roll around in her sleep, but he wasn't taking any chances, considering with the irritable state she was in. Neither of them got much of any sleep that night. They were both aching to return home, and the first light of day couldn't come soon enough. Sylvie fell down on her hands and knees and dunked her head into the cool waters of the little stream. Her own supply of water had run out 2 nights ago, and her thirst was almost unbearable. There was still a little water left over, enough for Valden's needs, but he felt unable to drink it while his sister had to suffer. That ordeal had come to an end, thankfully, and the two of them could also wash themselves and rest for a while before continuing the journey home. Unfortunately, neither of them remembered the route they had taken to the mountains, and Sylvie had to guess the way back. She figured that as long as they kept descending in a general westward direction, they should eventually reach the old giant lands. She had been walking for almost a week, though, and her food supply, like her water, was used up already. Her legs ached continuously, and her feet were covered in blisters, but she couldn't give up. She reminded herself constantly that the alternative to pushing on was death in the wilderness, for both herself and her tiny brother. Valden had more or less healed up by now, and was actually in better health than she was. But the distance was far too great for him to walk, and she wouldn't last the time it would take for him to go and fetch help. That was the best feeling I can ever remember, Sylvie sighed after she had gulped down several thousand gallons of clean, sparkling water. She lay down on the grass, soaking up the warm sunlight, another pleasant feeling she had almost forgotten about. Her warm clothes had been discarded several days ago. She now wore only a ragged tunic and trousers, and looked the complete opposite of the royal princess she actually was. Valden came and sat right next to her ear, in the shadow of her head. "Don't rest too long," he reminded her. "We're nearly home, and if you lie here much longer, you'll never want to get up again." "Almost home?" she exclaimed. "Valden, we've been walking. No, I have been walking down this valley for days, and we haven't seen one other person or any sign of the giant lands. How much longer do I have to go before you realize it's hopeless? We're going the wrong way." She wanted to cry. But if her time in the wild had taught her one thing, it was that she was a much tougher person than she had realized. Crying was not her thing anymore. Instead, she simply sighed again and closed her eyes. She knew he was right, but for once she just decided to ignore him and to try to get some actual rest. Valden looked up at the weary expression on her face and decided not to push her any further. He would be of much more help if he could scout ahead and see if he could find anything that would help them get back home. "I'm going to climb that ridge over there," he told her. "Maybe I'll be able to see a familiar landmark or something. I'm almost certain we're close to home. Also, is it just me, or does all this grass seem a bit oversized?" Sylvie barely heard him, having almost passed out due to fatigue. He let her be and headed off. After swimming across the great river, he began searching for a way to reach the top of the ridge. Viewed from up close, it looked more like a cliff rather than a ridge, being over 1,000 feet high and incredibly steep in some places. They had to be in what used to be the realm of the giants now. The scale of the surroundings pretty much confirmed that. He gathered his strength and began the daunting climb. Many hours later, an exhausted Valden crawled up the side of a large boulder and collapsed on the top. His arms were burning with pain, and he had more than a few close shaves on the way up, nearly falling to his death once or twice. But if Sylvie could find the strength to keep going day after day, so could he. After catching his breath, he struggled up the last few yards and took a look at what lay beyond the ridge. When he saw what lay before him, He was so overjoyed that he nearly lost his footing and fell all the way down again. The great forest, which stretched down to the plains far below, was definitely giant size. Some of the trees were over 400 yards high. From his lofty vantage point, however, he could see straight across their tops. And there, in the far distance below, lay the unmistakable sight of a ruined city, with only one building left intact. The castle that was his home. It had to be over 100 miles away. He could barely see it even though the air was clear, but that was no more than a few hours' walk for his little sister. He knew that she had pretty much reached the end of her strength, but maybe if he told her how close they were to home, she would feel motivated enough to get them both back safely. There wasn't much to lose, though. He still had to climb all the way down again, and with his body already tired from the climb up, taking a wrong step would be much more likely than it was before. Her parents had gone to bed some time ago, but Belina still found it difficult to fall asleep each night. Constantly being worried about Lorek didn't help matters much. She would so much rather have him staying here with her, in her room, where she could keep him safe. But her parents were adamant that they would have to get married first. So she responded by moving their wedding date as far forward as she could, a week after Lorek's 16th birthday, which was the minimum age at which boys and girls could get married in Vandan. That day was still many months away, though, and she knew that she couldn't get a decent night's sleep until it came. Meanwhile, Lorek was staying at the home of the mayor of Rismark. His father, Orlok, was still unable to accept the choice his son had made and had moved back to his old home in Elgon, leaving Lorek behind to look after himself. As she thought about all these things, Belina made herself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table. Just as she took her first sip, she heard a sudden knock on the door. She jumped in shock, nearly dropping her cup, and wondered who it could be. It was a giant-sized door, of course, and since her mother was fast asleep, that left only one person who it could be. She ran over and opened it, only to be knocked back as her little sister Sylvie fell into her arms. Belina shrieked aloud. "Sylvie!" she cried out. "Sylvie, you're back! You're home! Are you all right?" Sylvie merely muttered something inaudible. Belina, seeing that her sister was in need of help, laid her down carefully on the kitchen floor and rushed off to wake her mother. The two of them returned as quickly as possible and found the tiny figure of Valden sitting on Sylvie's chest. She had been carrying him in her hands, but Belina hadn't noticed him earlier. Valerie immediately knelt down and lifted him up to embrace him. "Oh, my beautiful children," she exclaimed, tears forming in her eyes. "Oh, you both come home. And you're safe. Oh, how glad I am to see you." "It's great to see you too, Mom," Valden gasped as his mother squeezed him against her bosom. But you have to help Sylvie. I think she's fainted." Sylvie had indeed passed out on the floor and was lying there peacefully, as if she were sleeping. Belina ran and fetched a glass of water, and the cold liquid helped to revive the young princess a little. She managed to greet her mother and sister, but was still very weak and on the edge of slipping off into unconsciousness again. Valerie put her son down on the floor and took hold of Sylvie's shoulders. "Help me carry her upstairs, Belina," she ordered. "She needs a bath and fresh clothes, and a meal. Would you mind preparing some food while I help clean her up?" Carrying the young girl between them, they headed upstairs, leaving Valden alone. Not completely alone, though. A figure came walking out of the shadows, and before anything could be said, Valden had run up to his father and gave him a most uncharacteristic hug. "I missed you, Dad," he admitted. "So have I, Valden. I missed you both, and I couldn't be happier that you came home, and not a moment too soon, it appears." "Oh yeah, Sylvie. She hadn't eaten anything in days. We've got to go and help her, Dad. What if she doesn't make it? It's all right, son. There's no need to panic. Your mother and sister are taking care of Sylvie, and there's not much we tiny men can do to help. In fact, it's probably a good idea to get yourself looked after as well. Dad, I'm fine. Really? You're covered in dust, and you've got bandages all over your body? How did that happen, by the way? It's a long story, and I'm really tired. Can it wait till tomorrow? Alban hugged his son again. Of course it can. I'm just overjoyed that you're back. Come, let's get you something to eat first. Then you can go and rest. But I'll expect a full account of everything that happened to you as soon as you're up tomorrow. Understood? Yes, Your Majesty. They both laughed. Valden was indeed happy to be home. But the desire for adventure had by no means left him. He knew he'd want to go on another journey again soon, perhaps preparing for it a bit more thoroughly this time. And he still needed to talk to his parents about the villagers he'd met and who wanted to become part of the Kingdom of Vandan. Just then, Belina came down the stairs, and she greeted Valden excitedly. She gave her father and brother a lift to the kitchen table and offered to make Valden something to eat. She'll be quite all right, she said, after Valden asked about Sylvie. She's not in as bad a condition as she appeared to be. She managed to take a bath before Mom sent her to bed. I gotta make her some food now and take it up to her. Ah, so we do have time for the tale of your adventures, Valden. Tomorrow, Dad. While her concerned family sat around her, with the exception of Valden, who had already been asleep, Sylvie ate what was probably the best tasting meal she had ever had. 6 slices of bread with honey, 2 whole apples, and a bowl of soup later, she felt like herself again. Still, she couldn't help remembering the terrible hunger she'd had for the last few days, and so she ate yet another slice. Oh, it tastes so good, she said with a mouthful of food. Thank you so much, Mom. Thank Belina. She's the one who made it for you. Thanks, Belina. You really should learn to take better care of yourself, honey, Alban said. If you don't think you've got enough food for the journey, I would rather you turn back. Not reach your destination is a lot better than dying of hunger. Believe me. Oh, I'm not doing anything like this again. Ever, she exclaimed. Valden can go by himself next time. Once was enough for me. Although, there were a few parts that were kind of fun. Another story for tomorrow? Valerie asked. Sylvie nodded, and her mother gave her a kiss on the cheek. The young girl, feeling like a princess again, could barely keep her eyes open. Alban said goodnight as well, as did Belina. They promised her that she could lie in bed as late as she wished tomorrow, and that there would be a huge breakfast waiting for her when she got up. I guess I'm going to have to go away more often if this is the welcome I get when I come back each time, she laughed. Sweet dreams, my little princess. Thanks, Mom. Thanks for everything. I can't wait to hear what you've been up to, Belina said, as they all got up to leave. I'll bring Lorak along. Then I can introduce him to Valden and you. Who's Lorak? Your boyfriend? Well, actually, he's my fiancé. What? Sylvie yelled, suddenly sounding a lot more awake. You're getting married? You? Yes, I am. But that's another long story. Just go to sleep, little sis. We'll catch up on everything tomorrow. Sylvie was burning to hear about Belina's upcoming marriage, but despite that, she fell asleep almost as soon as her family had left the room. A pillow feels so much better beneath one's head than a cold hard rock, she thought, and absolutely nothing could compare to a warm, comfortable bed. So it was a great surprise to find that deep down, she actually missed traveling with her tiny brother. Maybe my adventure is not over yet, she thought. Maybe. Just maybe. The end.